This is a painful incident from a girls' school in Karachi, where a 12-year-old girl gave birth to a baby in the school's washroom. The girl was a student at the same school. Why did this video go viral so quickly? This is a plea to all those whose children go to school, whether it's school, university, or college, and even to all the children who should watch this video. There is a significant lesson and warning for everyone in this video. This story is narrated by a teacher from the same school. She says, "As usual, I was the first to arrive at school, and no one was present in the staff room. Only a few girls were heading toward their classes. My husband would drop me at school on his way to his office, which was quite far, so he used to leave early and drop me off too. As I was heading towards the staff room to take off my burqa, I suddenly felt abdominal pain and remembered that I hadn't brought my essentials. My special days were about to start, and I had forgotten about it. Thankfully, I had packed the necessary items in my bag. I quickly grabbed my bag. Since no one had arrived at school yet and the teacher's washroom was far, I went to the students' washroom to manage the situation, fearing stains on my clothes, which would be both problematic and embarrassing. But as soon as I entered the students' washroom, I was shocked by the sight in front of me. My screams echoed throughout the school. As I quickly stepped out of the washroom, I began to feel nauseous. By then, other teachers and the principal had arrived, since school was about to start. Seeing my condition, the principal asked what was wrong, noting that I didn't look well today. In a state of distress, I explained to her what I had just witnessed in the washroom. She was taken aback, and the other teachers looked at me in shock and concern because this was a girls' school and such an incident in its washroom was a grave matter. The principal immediately rushed to the washroom and returned a few minutes later, covering her nose with a cloth. The cleaning staff had arrived and the principal called them immediately, instructing them to bring the unconscious girl from the washroom to the staff room. It took great effort, but the staff managed to bring the unconscious girl, whose uniform was completely soaked in blood, to the staff room. Following the principal, a few senior teachers and I also reached the staff room. The principal instructed the rest of the teachers to manage the other students and ensure this incident didn't spread outside. The girl's washroom was locked. The principal tried to revive the girl, but she had lost a significant amount of blood. I suggested taking the girl to the hospital immediately, but the principal was terrified because this wasn't a minor issue. It could become a police case, tarnishing the school's reputation. The principal feared being held accountable and having to answer questions, so she wanted to keep the matter discreet. She then called a lady doctor she knew, who came and checked the girl, saying her condition was critical and she needed to be taken to the hospital immediately. The doctor warned us that if the girl didn't regain consciousness soon, she could go into shock or even die. The doctor's words scared us terribly. I urged the principal not to delay and take her to the nearest hospital. Whatever happens later can be dealt with. As a mother of 2 daughters, seeing the girl's condition shook me to the core. I accompanied the principal in rushing the girl to the hospital. The doctors immediately attended to her and took her to the operation theater. While waiting, the principal asked me, "This girl studies in your class, doesn't she? Do you know what's going on? How long has this been happening? This can't be a one-day incident." The principal's words left me silent, because, indeed, this wasn't a one-day issue. For quite some time I had noticed and sensed various things, but I never imagined the matter would escalate to such an extent. Shortly after, the principal received a call from the school. Senior teachers informed her that the news of the incident had spread among the students, and despite efforts to keep it quiet, whispers about it were circulating. The principal became extremely anxious, fearing for the school's reputation. She was visibly sweating because the girl was in school uniform, and everything had occurred within the school premises. This left her terrified about the trouble she could face. She turned to me and said, "Somehow this matter needs to be resolved here and now. Call the girl's guardians, reprimand them, and send the girl back to her home. We'll return to the school, and this matter will end here." My heart wasn't ready to agree to this approach, but under the principal's pressure, I called the girl's family. "It's Green Mackenzie. The girl was an orphan, with only her mother as her guardian. Her mother worked as a domestic helper in my neighborhood, so reaching out to her wasn't difficult. When she arrived at the hospital and was informed about the situation, she broke into loud cries, blaming us and accusing us of negligence. A crowd of people in the hospital gathered, turning the incident into a public spectacle. The principal struggled to quiet her down and eventually threatened her, saying that if she didn't stop, it would be her daughter's reputation that would be tarnished. This made her fall silent. The principal then began harshly interrogating the mother, asking, "What has your daughter been up to? What kind of mother are you that you didn't notice anything? Your daughter has committed such a grave act." The principal's harsh words left the mother visibly shaken. She stared at the principal in disbelief, likely unprepared for this tone and these accusations. It seemed the principal's only aim was to pin the blame entirely on the girl's mother and distance herself from the matter as quickly as possible by returning to the school. The mother, on the other hand, firmly maintained that her daughter was virtuous and had never done anything wrong. The girl's mother kept asking us what had happened to her daughter at the school because her daughter didn't go anywhere else besides school. The principal, being an educated and clever woman, quickly tried to absolve herself of any responsibility. She told the mother, "Once your daughter regains consciousness, you can ask her yourself what happened. We don't know anything about it." Then she signaled me to return to school. The truth was, I didn't want to leave that girl behind. She was one of the brightest and most virtuous students in my class. I could personally vouch for her character. Yet, despite what had happened to her, someone must have been responsible. However, I was powerless against the principal's authority. It was school hours, and I had to return to fulfill my duties. Reluctantly, I consoled the girl's mother and advised her to have patience, then returned to school with the principal. When we arrived at school, all the teachers were speculating about what the girl might have said, but we were informed that she had not yet regained consciousness. I went to my class, but faint whispers reached my ears, students quietly discussing the incident and questioning the girl's character. Everyone was puzzled and shocked, trying to make sense of the matter. Even though I had returned to school, I was still deeply shaken. The scene in the washroom haunted my mind, and I couldn't fathom how something like this could have happened to a 13-year-old girl. This wasn't something that could be hidden or ignored. It was a grave matter that demanded justice. However, the principal had issued strict instructions that no one was to discuss this incident in the school anymore. The washroom had been cleaned, and any evidence found there had been disposed of. By the time afternoon came and school ended, everyone left for their homes with a myriad of unanswered questions in their minds. But my destination wasn't my home. It was the hospital. I had to go to Zainab. She was a poor innocent child who needed me at that moment. I didn't even know if she had regained consciousness. I took a rickshaw and headed to the hospital. On the way, Zainab's fragile existence lingered in my mind. Her blood-soaked uniform and her tiny, unconscious body lying in the washroom had shaken me deeply. When I arrived at the hospital, Zainab's mother told me that her condition had improved slightly, but that she still hadn't opened her eyes. The doctors weren't allowing visitors yet. Then, breaking down into tears, she hugged me and cried, saying, "Miss Naila, you know that I am a widow, earning a living by working in people's homes. All I wanted was for my daughter to study and make something of herself so she wouldn't have a ruined future like mine. But how could I have known that such an injustice would happen to her within the walls of her school?" Her words startled me. I asked, "How can you be so sure that what happened to her occurred at the school? This seems like something that has been going on for months." Zainab's mother replied, "Because for months now, Zainab has been afraid of the school. She would hesitate and become anxious every time we talked about it. Whenever I would iron her school uniform, tears would well up in her eyes. She'd say, 'Amma, I don't feel like going to school. Please don't make me go.' Yet before, she used to be so eager for school that she would never agree to take a day off. I thought that maybe, as she grew older, she was losing interest in studying, so I'd scold her and insist on sending her to school, thinking that education was essential for her future. But now I feel something must have been troubling her deeply. Her words left me lost in thought. There were some male teachers at the school who were overly familiar with the girls and often engaged in unnecessary conversations with them. One teacher in particular, Sir Harris, had a habit of getting close to the girls whenever he had the chance, making inappropriate small talk. However, I couldn't accuse anyone without proof, especially until Zainab regained consciousness and could tell us herself. After some time, I started receiving calls from home. My daughters had returned from school, and I knew I needed to be there for them. I asked Zainab's mother for permission to leave, promising to return in the evening. Before leaving, I placed some money in her hands to help with any immediate needs, and then headed home. Even after reaching home, my mind was preoccupied with thoughts of Zainab. Her plight consumed me, leaving me unable to focus on anything else. When my husband returned from work in the evening, I told him the entire story. Hearing it, he was left in shock. He asked, "If that girl was in your class, how did you not notice anything all this time?" I explained to him that Zainab was an orphan. I had always observed her being somewhat troubled, but in recent days, her behavior had been especially strange. She was physically present in the class, but mentally absent. Her test scores were poor, and her academic performance was declining. She would sit listlessly in class, barely participating. A few days ago, her health had noticeably worsened. She often felt dizzy and would rest her head on her desk. I assumed her poor condition was due to her difficult home situation, thinking perhaps she was malnourished or overly stressed. I wish I had known the real reason behind her distress. I could have helped her. Things wouldn't have escalated to the point where she's now fighting for her life. After finishing my chores, I asked my husband to take me to the hospital. He agreed and drove me there. By the time we arrived, Zainab had regained consciousness. I rushed to her side and held her hand. Her face had turned pale, and tears were streaming from her eyes. I gently said, "Zainab, trust me, my dear. Please tell me how all this happened and who is responsible." But she only broke into heart-wrenching sobs. No matter how much I asked, she didn't utter a word. I decided not to pressure her further, given her fragile condition. Exhausted and heartbroken, I returned home.
I wanted to inform the police about the matter, but Zainab's mother was adamantly against it. She feared further disgrace. The principal, too, opposed the idea. I was torn. I needed to safeguard my job, but I also wanted to get justice for Zainab. It was clear I had to take action on my own. My husband, sensing my determination, advised me, "Whatever you decide to do, think it through carefully. Remember, you are the first person to witness the girl and the baby. You'll inevitably be questioned, and dealing with the police won't be easy. They'll summon you repeatedly, which might affect your job and disturb our household. You know how the system works. It's like the law of the jungle here." He had the typical mindset of staying out of others' problems. While his concerns were practical, they clashed with my sense of responsibility as a teacher and my moral obligation to seek justice for Zainab. I felt it was my responsibility to protect my student and ensure that something like this never happened again, especially within the school premises. Action needed to be taken. The next morning, I went straight to the principal's office and said, "Madam, we can't simply let Zainab's case be dismissed so easily. Her mother may not have filed a police complaint, but we must take this step. Someone has clearly wronged her, and it might have happened within the school itself. You saw her condition with your own eyes. She gave birth to a premature baby in the school washroom. She was barely 4 or 5 months pregnant. What if she had died? Who would have been held responsible? Thankfully, she is alive and improving, but what if this happens again to another student?" Some developer, the principal, glared at me and replied coldly, "Miss Naila, you're overthinking this matter for an orphan girl. I've already silenced her mother and even sent money for Zainab's treatment. Consider this case closed. I cannot risk the school's reputation for Zainab, nor can I invite trouble for myself. My Hajj flight is in a few days, and if I get entangled in police and legal matters, I might not be able to go. I can't jeopardize this." Her firm words left no room for argument. She instructed me to return to my class, and reluctantly, I obeyed. When I entered the classroom, all 60 girls seemed to stare at me with curiosity and unease. I kept glancing at each face, consumed by the thought that if this could happen to Zainab, it could happen to any of them tomorrow. This thought made it impossible for me to sit still. I began speaking privately with the students, especially those who sat near Zainab or interacted with her regularly. Most of them said that her behavior had changed in recent months, but no one knew why. Then, one girl, who used to leave school with Zainab, shared something that left me stunned. She said, "A few months ago, the computer teacher kept Zainab back after school hours. Zainab wasn't very good at computers. She didn't have a computer at home or anyone to help her." Her words hit me like a thunderbolt. It was a clue, something that might explain what had happened. I realized this matter went deeper than anyone had imagined, and that someone in the school might be responsible for Zainab's suffering. The girl continued, explaining that Zainab had been struggling with computers and repeatedly failing tests. And the computer teacher had told her to stay back after school one day, promising to teach her properly. That day, Zainab didn't come home with her as usual. From that day on, Zainab's behavior changed. She added, "I thought maybe the teacher was giving her extra attention, and that's why she became arrogant and stopped valuing my friendship, so I stopped talking to her." Hearing this, the girl fell silent, but her words sent chills down my spine. I couldn't believe my suspicion about the computer teacher, Sir Harmat, might actually be correct. So I decided to confront him directly rather than beat around the bush. After school hours, when most of the teachers had left, I waited for Sir Arma in the classroom. As he was about to leave, I called out to him. He turned around, surprised, and I greeted him with a smile. Then I said, "I know who is responsible for what happened to Zainab." My words startled him. He looked at me in shock and replied, "If that's the case, you should immediately file a police complaint and have the culprit arrested." Delaying justice is wrong, his response puzzled me. He was speaking with such composure and righteousness that I doubted my suspicions momentarily. If he were guilty, how could he respond like this? But I pressed on, determined to get answers. I asked firmly, "Why did you keep Zainab after school 5 months ago? What was so important that it couldn't be done during regular school hours?" His face turned pale. He stammered for a moment, then tried to defend himself. "Miss Naila, are you accusing me? Do you think I did something wrong to Zainab?" I remained silent, staring at him, and he eventually continued. "Zainab was struggling with computers, so I asked her to stay back after school to help her in the lab. But that day, my wife called me suddenly. She was unwell and had been taken to the hospital." I listened carefully, noting his nervous tone. His explanation sounded plausible, but something about his demeanor made me question whether he was telling the whole truth. Zainab's heartbreaking confession was like a thunderbolt. That evening, when I visited her at the hospital, I gently asked, "Zainab, please tell me what happened in the computer lab that day. Did Sir Harmat come to you, or was it the watchman?" At first she hesitated, then burst into uncontrollable sobs, as if I had reopened a deep wound. Through her tears, she finally shared the truth that shook me to my core. She said that day Sir Harman asked me to stay back to help me with computers, but instead the watchman came into the lab. He took advantage of the empty school, locked the door, and Zainab broke down again but managed to continue. "He assaulted me and then threatened to kill me if I told anyone." Hearing this, I felt the ground beneath me give way. Then, 2 years later, I felt the ground beneath me give way. The horror of her words and the weight of her trauma left me numb. Zainab had endured unimaginable pain and fear for months, unable to speak out because of the threat on her life. It all made sense now. The watchman's nervousness, his evasive responses when I questioned him earlier. His involvement was clear, but the principal's insistence on silence and her departure for Hajj the next morning meant I was on my own. The school's inaction and cover-up had allowed a predator to go unchecked. I knew I couldn't let this slide. It wasn't just about Zainab, but about ensuring that no other student suffered the same fate. Despite the principal's warnings and the risks to my career and personal safety, I resolved to report the matter to the police. Justice had to be served no matter the cost. Zainab, terrified and traumatized, fell silent after revealing her harrowing experience. As her condition worsened, she eventually confided in someone, the same watchman who had assaulted her. Her health had been declining because the watchman, realizing she was pregnant, started giving her various medications in an attempt to hide his crime. Despite his efforts, Zainab began experiencing severe abdominal pain, which culminated in the premature birth of a 5-month-old baby in the school washroom 2 days ago. The watchman, fearing discovery, fled to his village. No one knew where he had come from or where he had gone. Zainab's mother, despite learning the truth, refused to involve the police or pursue legal action. She was unwilling to risk further tarnishing her daughter's reputation. Knowing the identity of the perpetrator but unable to act against him left me feeling helpless. The principal, who could have taken action earlier, had already left for Hajj, prioritizing her personal plans and the school's reputation over justice. I couldn't help but question whether such an act of worship would be accepted when she had chosen to ignore her moral duty. She had the power to prevent this from escalating, but chose not to. To all parents and guardians reading or hearing the story, I plead, pay close attention to your children. If you notice any changes in their behavior, ask questions and create an environment where they feel comfortable sharing anything with you. Be their friend, their confidant, and their protector. In today's world, we cannot trust anyone blindly, especially when it comes to our children's safety. Monitor your children closely, ensure you are aware of their surroundings and relationships, and take timely action when needed. Share this message widely to create awareness and prevent such tragedies from happening to anyone else. Schools, colleges, universities, even hospitals are not as safe as they should be for our children. One small action on your part could save a child from harm and bring goodness into our society. Like, share, and subscribe to spread this message far and wide. Together, we can create a safer environment for our children.